well, then they'll never, ever be able to make the playoffs with this quarterback, if that makes sense.
Matt Collar is sharper than ever. Let's begin with the news of the offensive coordinator, Kevin Stefanski. I told you this before. It kind of scares me that they interviewed a bunch of guys, and then they said, okay, well, we didn't figure anyone out. We didn't like anyone, so we're just going to go with Kevin Stefanski. Is this the right choice? Are you a fan of this? Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, first, I mean, you're always going to interview people. You're always going to have a list of people that you're going to interview, even if you've already made your decision. And Mike Zimmer said in his final press conference that it wouldn't be fair to anyone, to those people who are potential candidates or to the organization, if they didn't do their due diligence with other candidates that they like. So,
Fair enough.
I mean, it makes sense. You're always going to do that, but I don't think there was another choice for the team or for Mike Zimmer. I think that the way he looked back on it was that Kevin Stefanski should have been his offensive coordinator all along, that he should have taken over for Pat Shurmur. They should have handed the ball off to him. And the way that I look at it is that they overreacted to losing in the NFC Championship to the Philadelphia Eagles. And they decided, okay, well, if we lost to them and they figured us out, then we got to hire their guy. And I don't think that was really the right logic for them, and I don't think that it helped the offense at all to have to go through the changes, especially with such an inexperienced offensive coordinator who had not been good previously in Cleveland as an offensive coordinator. He did not do anything special for that team, and that was his only experience, and I think that was a lot to ask of John DeFilippo, too, to come in here without experience and be asked to go run a Super Bowl caliber team or something, right? Whereas Kevin Stefanski had a lot of experience with that offense that succeeded with Pat Shurmur and then coaching multiple different position groups and things like that. I think they like that about him. And the biggest thing to me, though, is the relationship with Kirk Cousins. I think anyone who's been around Kirk Cousins and anytime you listen to him talk, you realize how intelligent he is about the game. And I think that's a guy you want to communicate with as much as possible and find out what he's comfortable with, what works for him. And I don't get the impression that was the case with John DeFilippo, and it seems that it was with Kevin Stefanski throughout the year. And I think that would be vital to them taking a step forward on offense with Cousins next year. Sure, there's other things to talk about, blocking schemes, getting Dalvin Cook the ball, but it's really about Kirk Cousins and who can get the most out of him. So instead of guessing on whether Mike Mularkey would get along with Kirk Cousins, why not go with the guy who you know already does?
Fair enough. I want to go back real quick about the Stefanski, working in the system for a long time. When you have a first-year quarterback in Kirk Cousins and you have a first-year offensive coordinator, I feel like a lot of the times a lot of things are passive-aggressive. Like if Kirk Cousins doesn't want to do something, he doesn't want to hurt the other guy's feelings or whatever it may be. When you have a guy in Kevin Stefanski that's been around the team, Kirk maybe won't question him as much as he maybe did with Flip because it's Flip's first year. So I think that kind of creates a little tension that maybe not a lot of people are talking about. Number 3 here, what do you think of Mike Zimmer? How do you think he did this season? He had some rough spots.
Well, I would say that anytime you miss the playoffs, the head coach is going to be responsible for that, right? So You can't say it wasn't any of his fault. But when they hired Mike Zimmer in 2014, the idea was that he would turn around the defense, and that's how they would win. And then they would just need enough from their offense, hope to get a quarterback. Of course, in 2014, hoping Teddy Bridgewater would be their franchise quarterback and move forward. And you get enough offense to win, but the defense is always going to be there. And throughout his career, including this season, the defense was always there. And on his side of the ball, despite the fact that they lost Anthony Barr for a couple of games, and they lost Xavier Rhodes on multiple occasions, and Trey Wayans was hurt, Mike Hughes, Sendejo out for the season, Mike Hughes out for the season, Everson Griffin missing for 5 games. They still end up with 4th best in yards in the NFL and number 1 in the key situations, 3rd down and red zone. I think that is an incredibly good coaching job on his side of the ball. Now, the thing that he'll be criticized for ultimately is his sort of hands-off approach until he feels like it with the offense.
Right.
Right? Are you going to be hands-off or not? And if you're talking about being post-game press conference when you decide to openly criticize the coordinator, I wouldn't advise that, right? And that's where he's going to have to be a little more patient sometimes. He's going to have to bite his tongue sometimes, I think, when it comes to Kevin Stefanski, because there will be games where maybe you don't run the ball enough, and there will be games where you lose and don't perform well enough on offense. And I don't know if it was that they weren't getting along behind the scenes and that was the way it was coming out, or what it might have been, or if DiFilippo wasn't following the things that Zimmer wanted to do, or what it might have been. I mean, we can speculate on all of that, but I think what Mike Zimmer has to learn from his experience here is that you can't just hammer the offensive coordinator over and over again in public. People will notice, and it's just not a generally a good look for him as a head coach. And I think it created a distraction, because when you say those things, then of course we have to ask the players about those things, and then they've got to answer those questions as well. And there was a lot of tension that I think maybe could have been alleviated to some extent. But in terms of how he managed games, there's a few things you could nitpick. Going for it on fourth down against New Orleans was maybe a little aggressive, then kind of might have hurt their chances to win that game. But aside from that, I mean, on his side of the ball, the reason they hired him to come here, he gave them every chance to be a playoff contender, and they did not get what they needed out of the offensive side. So you can't say that none of that was his fault, but you also can't say, oh, they should fire him and go hire the next offensive Sean McVay genius or something, because the team's defense, once again, put them in a position to be a legitimate contending team, and that's why Mike Zimmer is here.
Great point. I'm sure you haven't gotten this question enough. What is the number one priority when it comes to draft day, or is there any free agents? Because I'm looking at guys on defense, right, and there's a couple of guys that I'm not trading. One of them, Harrison Smith. The other one, Kendricks. The other one, Daniil Hunter. The other one, Linval Joseph. Maybe Sheldon Richardson if you re-sign him. But Everson Griffin, he can walk to me. Trey Waynes, he can walk to me. Even Rhodes. Are there any guys that you would be okay with trading defensively for an offensive lineman? Or break this down for me.
Well, there's some very interesting options when it comes to trading, because when you look at Holton Hill and the way he played and progress he showed,
I like
Mike
him.
Hughes, is going to be coming back from his injury. It does make it kind of intriguing, considering the cap hits of Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes, to potentially trade one. The only thing is, and I'm sure Mike Zimmer would say this, you can never have too many great defensive backs, because it's a passing league. And when you look at how the Vikings performed against the pass, I mean, that's one of the elite teams in the league almost every year he's been here, except for his first season. So I think part of that is drafting, developing, and having star defensive backs. And they do get hurt a lot too. And we saw that this year. The depth that they had really held them up and kept them in a lot of games, and I think that they want to keep that. I don't think you say just because Mike Hughes is here that you necessarily want to make one of those moves. Now, it would be very interesting if the Vikings said, we can scheme ourselves to a top 10 defense. Maybe not number one, but top 10, but we need more playmakers. We need more cap space to sign wide receivers and offensive linemen and everything else like that, and decided to rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit by taking away from the defense. I don't expect that that's going to happen. I think that they want to keep Anthony Barr around one way or the other, so they could possibly franchise tag him. Sheldon Richardson might be able to replace on the free agent market with someone a little bit cheaper. I thought he was very, very good, but he wasn't Aaron Donald, right? So if he's going to want huge money, then they're probably not going to be able to pay that. So it's how do they allocate some of that space? It's very hard to get great free agent guards for a decent price because everybody wants them. So I do think the one area that they have to get better is number 3, number 4 receiver, number 2 tight end. They had basically nothing in those areas this year. And with a quarterback who's going to go through his progressions and find the right guy as opposed to just forcing it to Thielen and Diggs, you got to give them other options. And I don't think that they did that for this year with the fact that Kendall Wright busted and then they didn't find anybody else.
Right. And that was my next question I was going to lead into. And that is Laquan Treadwell. I don't know. God knows why the Raiders are interested in him. I don't know. But what needs to be the move for the Vikings? I mean, they have to let this guy go. You got to try to bring in Jarius Wright somehow. I don't know. I mean, who can come in as a 3? Because Laquan Treadwell's days in a Viking uniform, I think, are done.
Yeah, I agree. I think you look for a conditional 6th-round pick or something like that, and you send him on his merry way to a team that's rebuilding. The Raiders make a lot of sense. I mean, if I'm the Raiders, I'm picking up everybody's former first-round picks that they're disgruntled with and hoping somebody turns it around. But as far as being on a win-now team, Laquan Treadwell probably shouldn't have been on this team this year.
No.
Because you could have seen this coming. They gave him his season to show that there was something there in 2017, and he barely contributed anything. And then this year it was even worse because when you look at yards per target, he's one of the worst in the league. There were key drops in big situations. And there were times where Kirk Cousins continued to look his way.
Yeah.
And I think that Cousins is just that type of quarterback. And that's why when he was at his best, 2016, of course he had a great offensive line. I would never contend against that. Offensive line is absolutely where everything begins. But he also had about 5 or 6 different receiving options, 2 great tight ends, 2 great wide receivers, a number 3 wide receiver, a running back out of the backfield who caught a lot of passes, and Chris Thompson. That was what they surrounded him with and got the most out of him. And I think that shouldn't be ignored. And if they can create even a small amount of cap space by trading Treadwell, but even if they release him, they create just a sliver of space, and they're not really hurting themselves. So I think it's time to move on from him and just give that roster spot to somebody who can step in and be an impact player.
And I couldn't stand what he said at the end of the year. I did my part for this team to win. I mean, that's for another discussion, Matt. But let's move past it. Last 2 things here, and very quickly, I want to talk about this because I didn't get your stance on it. What was your thoughts of the Adam Thielen and Kirk Cousins little fight on the sideline? What did you take of that?
Well, I think that any quarterback and wide receiver after the game and so forth are going to tell us that there was nothing to see here.
Yep.
But when you ask any other quarterback who played in the league or wide receiver, you can't say that was a good thing. No matter which way you want to spin it, it was embarrassing, I think, for the team. Everyone saw it. We had lunch with my wife's great aunt who is 90 years old, and she mentioned it. She's been a lifelong Vikings fan, and she brought up the 2 guys fighting on the sideline. It's just, it's a thing that stands out that everybody notices that makes it look like these 2 guys are not on the same page, and it's very clear they're not. And I think it's always been, from the very beginning, a question mark about Kirk Cousins and how he's going to lead. And I didn't see anything from this year to change my mind in where I thought that would be, which is that he's not going to be a Teddy Bridgewater. He's not going to be a Case Keenum. He isn't going to bring everyone together, and it's not going to have that same sort of feeling as it did with those 2 quarterbacks that really excelled in leadership. And it's something that Kevin Stefanski is going to be charged with helping that situation. Are they going to be able to get on the same page? And the idea that having another offseason is going to make those 2 be able to fit together. And even though they had great numbers, there was always something that was a little off. I mean, even in the early season when they were performing better, there would be throws to nowhere and things like that. And it was sort of noticeable that everyone wasn't on the same page all the time. So Stefanski, I think, can help that. But I also think just other leaders are going to have to step up. And maybe it's Pat Elflein next year as a 3rd-year center, or maybe it's Delvin Cook plays the whole season, or whoever it's going to be. You're going to need a good supporting cast of leaders there, because I don't think you have it at the quarterback position. I mean, that's not to say that Cousins is not capable of winning games because of his talent. I just don't think that's ever a thing he's been particularly good at, and he was criticized for in Washington, D.C. too. So, I think that's something that if we see again next year, we will definitely have to say, okay, this is a real problem. But until then, we'll have to see how Kevin Stefanski gets everyone on the same page.
All right, last thing before we let you go. Give me Matthew Collar Super Bowl prediction.
Well, my hot take at the beginning of the playoffs was Colts in the Super Bowl, surprising everyone, and then Saints on the other side because it's home field and it's the Superdome and it's Drew Brees. And so I'm gonna go Colts and Saints with a 2009 redux.
Wow.
And I will also go even hotter for your podcast here and say that Drew Brees wins the Super Bowl and walks off, retires right there, and they hand the ball over to Teddy Bridgewater as their quarterback. There you go.
Wow. Matt Collar. He never disappoints. Thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime, man. Thank you.
Yeah. Big thanks to Negative Dave, Marcus Fuller of the Star Tribune, and Matt Collar of ESPN 1500. Always a pleasure having you guys on. Great stuff. My producer, Brandon Morton, Jim Suhan. You can contact him if you want to advertise for the show. I'll talk to you guys next Sunday here on the